It was a chilly dawn on Friday, October 13th, 1307, and the balance of power in France was about to shift drastically. King Philip IV's agents were fanning out across France, poised to arrest every Knight Templar they could find in a single stunning sweep. In Paris, officials crashed through the doors of the Templar headquarters only to discover, to their astonishment, that the vaults were empty. The famed treasure of the order had vanished. And far to the west, at the coastal city of La Rochelle, legend claims the king's men arrived at the docks to a similarly baffling scene. If the legends are to be believed, the Templars' ships that once bobbed in their Atlantic harbor had slipped away, leaving nothing behind, and officially never to be seen again. Thus was born the enduring mystery of the lost Templar fleet of La Rochelle. Was there really a secret armada laden with knights and treasure? Or, as some have suggested, was this supposed historical event more fable than fact? Long before becoming the stuff of legend, La Rochelle was a practical asset for the Knights Templar. This Atlantic seaport in western France had been a major Templar base since at least the 12th century. The order received privileges in La Rochelle and helped transform the sleepy harbor into a bustling hub of trade. By the late 1200s, La Rochelle was effectively the Templars' chief Atlantic port, a counterpart to their ports in the Mediterranean. It was here that the knights stationed what they considered their main fleet of ships, though one should picture this fleet in context. Unlike a king's navy of dozens of ships, the Templars' Atlantic fleet was a relatively modest collection, mostly used for commerce and transport rather than direct conflict. Historical records show that Templar ships at La Rochelle were primarily engaged in trade, especially the lucrative wine trade. The order owned vineyards and produced wine in the region, and their ships ferried barrel upon barrel to markets in England and beyond. In other words, these weren't armadas bristling with knights in shining armor, but likely ordinary medieval merchant vessels tasked with hauling goods. While the Templars did have ships more suited for conflict, these were located with their Mediterranean assets. The Templars, being astute businessmen in addition to warriors, often rented additional ships as needed for their transport activities. Owning a huge permanent fleet would have been impractical, so they kept only a few ships on hand and hired others for bigger jobs. By all accounts, the fleet at La Rochelle was limited and utilitarian, not a mighty secret navy. This point becomes crucial when judging tales of a grand disappearance. The stage for the fleet's disappearance was set by the infamous events of October 1307. King Philip IV of France, deeply in debt to the Knights Templar and eyeing their assets, had resolved to destroy the order. Under the cloak of secrecy, Philip issued sealed orders to his officials across France to be opened and executed on the same day, Friday the 13th. At dawn that day, the roundup began. Templar brothers were arrested en masse, their commanderies raided, and their property seized. In Paris, the Templar Grand Master Jacques de Molay was taken into custody. Yet, intriguingly, no vast treasures were found. Philip's men searched the Paris temple treasury and found it virtually empty, fueling later speculation that someone had warned the Templars in time for them to move their wealth. It's within this drama that the legend of La Rochelle's fleet takes root. According to later accounts, the Templars managed a last-minute escape at La Rochelle. The story goes that as Philip's net closed around them, carts laden with chests of gold slipped out of Paris in the dark, racing toward La Rochelle. There at the port, Templar ships awaited under cover of night. Just hours or days before the king's officers arrived, a fleet of numerous ships allegedly set sail from La Rochelle, carrying fleeing knights and a fortune in treasure. When the royal arrest team finally reached La Rochelle's harbor, the docks were empty of Templar vessels, and the Order's ships had vanished into the Atlantic mist, destination unknown. The contemporary evidence for this escape is both scant and ambiguous. In the trials of the Templars that followed, one piece of testimony stands out. A Templar named Jean de Chalon claimed he heard it said that the Paris preceptor, Gérard de Villiers, fled with 50 horses and 18 galleys. This hearsay account, a second-hand rumor from a prisoner who, to put it mildly, wasn't treated well, is the only medieval reference to Templar ships escaping arrest. It's from here that the entire saga of a missing fleet seems to spring. Notably, Jean de Chalon didn't claim to witness the ships departing. He merely recounted a rumor circulating in the chaos of 1307. Assuming for a moment that some Templar ships did put to sea from La Rochelle ahead of the arrests, where could they have gone? Here the line between history and legend blurs even further, and theories are all over the place. Some of them are theoretically plausible, while others are outright fantastical, and tend to involve a certain island that the History Channel has made a meal out of for the last decade. But I'll get to all the ideas shortly. First, let's start with perhaps the most common idea, that the fugitive Templars headed north to safety. Scotland is frequently mentioned as a destination, since in 1307 Scotland was ruled by Robert the Bruce, who was outside King Philip's reach. Notably, he was also formally outside of the reach of the papacy as well. King Robert the Bruce had been excommunicated, and unlike many of the excommunications of the time, this wasn't for some arcane political reason. If the accounts are to be believed, he lured a baron to the church, where the baron presumed he would be safe, and that's when Robert finished him off. Later legend claims that Templars fought alongside the Scots at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, and that the treasure was used to fund Robert the Bruce's campaigns. This romantic notion of Templars in Scotland has inspired many a book and film, though hard evidence is lacking. It's conceivable a handful of Templars found asylum there, but the idea of a large Templar fleet unloading tons of gold on Scottish shores remains unproven folklore. That's not to say that it's definitely not true, but that we simply don't have the evidence. Another theory points to the Iberian Peninsula. Several Templar ships might have sailed to Castile, Portugal, or Aragon, where the persecution was less severe and sympathetic rulers could offer protection. In Portugal, for example, King Denis later absorbed the Templars into a new order, the Order of Christ, allowing the knights to continue quietly. Some speculate that any escaping Templar vessels could have headed to Portuguese ports, contributing their manpower and assets to the rebranded Templar successors there. This route has a ring of real possibility. Historically, many Portuguese Templars indeed survived by becoming Knights of Christ, and Portugal had a strong naval tradition. However, once again, there's no record of a treasure-laden convoy arriving in Lisbon or elsewhere, so it remains conjecture. That said, of course, secret convoys are generally kept secret and not recorded in any official records. The legend doesn't stop at Europe. In its most colorful form, the Templar fleet sails across the Atlantic Ocean, embarking on a transoceanic odyssey decades before Columbus. This fringe theory suggests the knights took their hidden treasure to the New World. There, on Oak Island in Nova Scotia or some other secret location, they supposedly buried the Templar treasure for safekeeping. If this sounds like the plot of an adventure novel or a Hollywood movie, that's because it essentially is. The 2004 film National Treasure, starring Nicolas Cage, even includes a significant nod to the idea of Templar treasure hidden in the New World. Finally, some down-to-earth researchers have proposed a far less exotic fate. Perhaps the Templar ships didn't make it far at all. The English Channel and the area surrounding it can be perilous waters. A few heavily laden ships fleeing in haste might have been wrecked in a storm, their secret cargo lost to the depths. It's an unromantic end, but not an implausible one. Medieval ships were at the mercy of weather, and a sudden gale could have sent the Order's escapees to a watery grave, unbeknownst to anyone on shore. Again, though, there's no hard evidence to say this occurred, only conjecture based upon rapid flight in overloaded boats. When we strip away the legend and scrutinize the facts, what picture emerges of the Templar fleet at La Rochelle and its supposed disappearance? First, it's clear that the Templars did use La Rochelle as a maritime base, but their naval resources were limited. The Order, at the time of its suppression, probably had no more than a handful of galleys in total, and those were built for the Mediterranean, not for Atlantic exploration. The ships operating out of La Rochelle were likely coastal traders, with their more significant naval assets in the Mediterranean itself. They were small and suitable for ferrying goods through relatively calm waters. Crucially, such ships were ill-suited to long ocean voyages. They couldn't carry enough provisions or withstand the ferocious winds and waves of the open Atlantic. This makes the idea of a Templar fleet immediately sailing to Scotland, across the rough Irish Sea, or especially to North America, extremely doubtful from a naval standpoint. Secondly, consider the documentation. King Philip's confiscators kept detailed records of the property seized from the Templars, including all records of the inventories kept by the Templars themselves. Nowhere in the surviving records is there an inventory of a significant fleet of Templar ships at La Rochelle. That said, they could have been rented ships, or ships that were kept off the record as things heated up in France. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, as the saying goes, but it does raise eyebrows. Notably, if a large fleet had been present and then gone missing overnight, one would expect it to be noted in correspondence at the time. Instead, the historical silence on this matter suggests that if any Templar ships departed, it was not a large-scale evacuation, but perhaps one or two ships quietly slipping away. It might even be that no ships were in port at that moment, and the Templars could have already dispatched them on routine runs. Thus, they could have unintentionally foiled Philip's plans, simply because there were no vessels docked to seize. In short, the dramatic disappearance may have been nothing more than the normal movement of a very small number of vessels. Under this theory, the Templars would have simply never returned their ships to their French base, and the ships may have found their way into the service of merchants. Finally, we have the perspective of modern scholarship on the fate of the Templars' wealth and personnel. No credible historical source from the 14th century describes a Templar convoy escaping France with vast riches. The first mentions of the lost fleet and treasure surface much later, as part of Templar myths and theories that blossomed over the centuries. In academic circles, the consensus is that while some Templars may have evaded capture and some assets were spirited away, there was no grand, coordinated seaborne evacuation. The consensus is that the mystery of the missing fleet is, in effect, a later invention, a legend that endures because it's an undeniably compelling tale. In the end, the tale of the lost Templar fleet at La Rochelle reminds us how history and myth can intertwine. It's easy to see why this story refuses to go away. It's equal parts tragedy and adventure, with a tantalizing question mark that invites us to fill in the blanks. We may never know exactly what happened to any Templar ships that left La Rochelle in 1307, but we also can't say for certain that there were even any that left in an escape. Our one source on the matter is inherently unreliable, as we can only imagine what horrors the Templar who confessed to hearing about the La Rochelle transport had to endure. It's also important to remember, too, that many of these captured Templars would basically confess to anything the Inquisitors wanted to hear. And since the Inquisitors wanted to hear proof of the misdeeds of the Order, a story of a vast treasury being moved out of the country, potentially to a rival nation, may have fit that bill. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to click that like button, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, don't forget to check out my other channels by clicking the links in the description below. Legend says that on quiet Baltic mornings, faint church bells echo from beneath the waves. These are the bells of Veneta, a fabled city of unmatched wealth that vanished beneath the sea. Often dubbed the Atlantis of the Baltic, Veneta was said to be a magnificent port metropolis overflowing with riches. Surprisingly, however, modern research has found ample evidence to suggest that this was actually based upon a real trade city that once existed in the region. Stories describe its churches with golden bells, and windows studded with jewels, and markets where nothing rare or desirable was missing. But this prosperity bred arrogance and sin. According to the traditional tale, the people of Veneta grew morally corrupt and boastful, defying divine law with their decadent lifestyle. In punishment, a great flood or tempest struck in a single day, dragging the entire city to the bottom of the Baltic Sea. Folklore also adds an additional eerie detail to Veneta's fate. Some say that on Midsummer Night, once every century, the lost city rises from the sea for a short time. Historians and archaeologists have scoured records and coastlines for clues. Interestingly, medieval chronicles do mention a great city in the same region, suggesting that Veneta's story drew on memories of a genuine place. In the 11th century, Adam of Bremen wrote of a wealthy Slavic trading emporium on an island in the Oder River's Baltic outlet, where merchants from many nations gathered. A century earlier, a traveler by the name of Ibrahim ibn Yaqub described a large city on the Baltic coast as the greatest of all European cities, boasting 12 gates and busy markets. These accounts likely refer to the same settlement, a real medieval port whose grandeur could have inspired the legend of Veneta. Over time, scholars have proposed different locations for this lost city. One long-standing theory placed Veneta off the coast of Usedom, near Kosorov, today on the German side of the Baltic. By the 16th century, people in that area believed a sunken city lay offshore. Crowds would even gather by the beach at Kosorov, straining to hear the submerged bells of Veneta ringing from beneath the waves. However, modern archaeological surveys have found no trace of a drowned medieval city on Usedom's coast. Without any physical evidence, the Kosorov location for Veneta is now regarded as folklore rather than fact. Another hypothesis, popular on old maps, placed Veneta near the tiny island of Rudin. This idea arose after a massive coastal flood in 1306 changed the shape of the shoreline there, sparking tales of land, and perhaps ruins of a city, lost to the sea. Like the Kosorov tale, however, the Rudin story is now considered a later legend, since again, no evidence has been found to support such a city on this now tiny island. By contrast, the strongest historical evidence points to Wolin, a large island at the Oder estuary, now in northwestern Poland, as the true basis for Veneta. Wolin was known in medieval texts by names like Julin, and some suggest it was even the legendary Viking base of Jomsborg. Further, it fits the geographical description of Adam of Bremen's wealthy port in the exact same region. This theory gained dramatic support from archaeology. Beginning in the 1930s, excavations in and around the modern town of Wolin uncovered the remains of a vast 9th to 12th century settlement. Archaeologists found fortifications, workshops, imported luxury goods, and a network of harbor installations. These facts all indicated that Wolin was indeed a major Baltic trading center in the early Middle Ages. The town reportedly stretched for several miles along the shore and housed thousands of inhabitants, making it one of the largest cities in northern Europe at its peak. Importantly, Volin's historical trajectory aligns with Veneta's legendary rise and fall. The real Volin prospered until the 11th century, when it suffered destruction at the hands of Danish invaders and subsequently declined. After about 1200, the once great port of Volin had largely collapsed, effectively lost until its ruins were studied centuries later. This makes Volin the leading contender for the factual core of the Veneta legend. The basis of the Veneta myth may have been invented by contemporaries who struggled to explain the desolation of this once grand trading metropolis on the Baltic Sea. Under this theory, over time, additional elements were added to the story, combining then-current religious sensibilities with the mythology of Atlantis. Further, some historians have proposed that there may be a connection between the name Veneta and the name Volin. Notably, the names do appear quite similar, which is another factor that has led to this belief. In scholarly opinion today, Veneta is best understood as a later legendary name for the historical early medieval city at Volin. While the story of Veneta's destruction is taken to be a myth, it definitely appears to have a strong basis in historical reality. Veneta's enduring appeal comes from the interplay between its mythic allure and historical grounding. As legend, it is a dramatic parable about hubris, a splendid city cursed and submerged for its people's sins, with only ghostly bells and rare reappearances to remind the world of its fate. In the end, the lost city of Veneta lives on in two forms. One is the enchanting legend, a sunken Baltic Atlantis that fires the imagination and warns of the perils of unchecked pride. The other is the historical investigation, the careful gathering of clues about medieval trade centers, floods, and conquests along the Baltic coast. The true story behind Veneta may never be fully confirmed until some unmistakable ruins are found, but the process of exploring the truth is part of the fascination with this mystery.